By your command.
We can make these nuclear explosions cleaner and cleaner. And I think the time is not far off where we can hope to have nuclear explosives completely clean.
Research is being done on nuclear explosives with so little radioactivity that excavation projects will be possible with no off-site radiation problems.
صورتها مباشر يا رجال ولا تقلقوا معاكم من الصبح يا شباب
Ja, schönen guten Tag. Ja, liebe Freunde, schön, dass ihr heute Abend gekommen seid. Ich möchte den Referenten ankündigen, Diplomphysiker Heinz Pommer, der aus Deutschland gekommen ist, um hier einen neuen Gesichtspunkt zum Thema 9/11 zu bringen. Er hat sich da jahrelang reingekniet und die Puzzlesteine zusammengetragen und möchte das heute mal vortragen, was er herausgefunden hat. Ja, wir begrüßen Heinz.
Thank you very much. Still a few words about myself. As you have already heard, I am a physicist, but I am earning my money by writing technical documentation. This means my job is to collect information inside an enterprise, information describing complex machinery as generators, and to simplify this information, to structure it into small pieces so that it becomes easily understandable. In short, I'm doing instruction manuals. In respect to 9/11, I have been researching this topic for 5 years. To begin with, I was in the fortunate situation not to see the pictures of 9/11 until September 12. Indeed, my cousin phoned me on that day and told me that the World Trade Center had completely collapsed. But I decided to wait one day before looking at the event to guard my distance. So, the next day, I already had a clear picture in my mind of what to expect. So, expecting the tower's top toppling over and falling down, or seeing the tower splitting into two parts, leaving a gaping fissure in the middle. Anyway, I thought a third of the tower must still be standing. The pictures, however, did in no way correspond to these expectations. Of course, what remains in a state of shock, seeing these pictures, seeing the suffering of the people. But at the same time, the stupidity of the explanations provoked in me a deep fatigue, a sort of tiredness, and I told myself, I don't want to have anything to do with this. That's not my job. I leave this to the architects and engineers. That's their field of business. Please don't bother me with this topic. Well,
the South Tower was the first to fall. The Marriott Vista Hotel was crushed. A half an hour later, the North Tower collapsed. World Trade Centers 4, 5, and 6 were left standing but damaged beyond repair. World Trade Center 7 fell after burning, for 7 hours.
Well, then 10 years passed by. And one evening, by chance, surfing on the internet and watching some clips on YouTube, I found a story from author Sophia Smallstorm, 9/11 Mysteries, Demolitions. And I was surprised to see how much information was actually available. In a certain way, I was even amused to see how rich the information pool was. An information pool created by individual persons. People like you and me collected all this without the help of a government institution or organization. And as a result, I started to get acquainted with this information, studying it in my spare time and to structure it in a sort of checklist. After all, that's my job. That's how I'm writing technical documentation.
So much to be explained. Why did the South Tower fall first when it was the second tower to be hit? Watch the top of Tower 2 leaning outward, about to topple. Then, suddenly, it disintegrates in midair. What causes this giant slab of steel and concrete to turn into dust before our eyes? Watch both buildings collapsing straight down, directly into the path of most resistance, which is all the floors and all the mass of the building itself. The World Trade Center towers came down in approximately 10 seconds. Seismic data from Columbia University puts the North Tower collapse at about 8 seconds and the South Tower at approximately 10. Here, the South Tower is half its original height, but wreckage from the upper collapse has not yet fallen this far. We are watching a demolition moving faster than gravity itself, a building bursting into powder from top to bottom. Here, the core of the North Tower finally gives up. 700 remaining feet of giant steel columns, among the strongest ever erected. What force acts upon the core to make it all of a sudden disappear? This is a pancake collapse. Why don't we see piles of floors at ground zero? And paper blown everywhere. Wouldn't a pancake collapse have trapped the contents inside? What blew this paper all over New York? What happened at the base of the towers just before they came down? Smoke appeared at street level. Watch the camera shake on its tripod as a large energy source rocks the ground. 9 seconds later, the North Tower falls.
Engineers are not just focusing on the Twin Towers. The most disturbing structural event was not that the Twin Towers fell, but that Tower 7, ignited by flying debris, fell due to fire alone.
So I structured and summarized the claims and findings of Sophia Smallstorm and the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. And I told myself, how can we recognize a classical controlled demolition? The propagation of dust clouds is only horizontally in case of a classical controlled demolition. But on 9/11 they vertically rose up to 1,500 meters. Normally, dust clouds are cold when a building is brought down, but on 9/11 people got burned. Normally, you can hear loud explosions clearly, but in this case we had a small earthquake 10 seconds before the collapse, and then you heard a deep roar, a bass howl. You have the destruction at the building's base, but in this case it stood firmly while disintegrating on top. And then the entire structure disintegrated in a huge fountain. Normally, you see a quite big heap of rubble, but in case of Building 7 we observed a sunken-in debris field, and in case of the towers, debris was scattered in a wide area around them, whereby most of the building disintegrated into small chunks. Normally, objects around the building do not inflame, and in this case on 9/11 cars went up in flames up to a distance of 800 meters. And one factor which becomes more and more obvious, the strange diseases developing nowadays. In case of classical controlled demolition there are no health issues, but in the meantime more than 72,000 people need medical care due to 9/11. Finally, we observe a strange and extreme cruelty of the state, indeed despising the citizens and the first responders by declaring the toxic air officially safe to breathe.
Before I continue to terrify people, we know that the Chinese symbol for crisis is the same symbol they use for opportunity. Has anyone heard that? So here's a first responder.
When people wake up, what are they going to discover?
They're going to discover they're being lied to. They're going to discover that all that glitters is not gold. They're going to discover that the Joneses don't exist. You're fighting a war to keep up with yourself. They're going to discover that experiments are made on people without their knowledge because they're prisoners. They're going to find out that only some people get to have the pie and some people don't. They're going to find out the middle class is being dissolved and it's becoming a clash between the haves and the have-nots. They're going to find out that the police's job is not to protect us, but to protect the government from us. They're going to find out that not only have things like 9/11 happened with knowledge prior and after, and they ushered out the families of some of the perpetrators the very next day when all flights in the country were shut down. They're going to find out that presidents, that leaders like Martin Luther King were assassinated, like Robert Kennedy were assassinated. They're going to find out that peace is not possible when you have a military-industrial complex. They're going to find out that war is still the biggest game, still the most profitable, and still the one that they always fall back on when the money gets gone. They're going to find out that our dollar is not worth anything. They're going to find out that Fort Knox doesn't have any gold in it. They're going to find out that we're in trouble. They're going to find out that gun control means hitting your target, not taking your guns away. They're going to find out that Adolf Hitler and Stalin thought that gun control was a great idea also. They're going to find out that when people are armed with the truth and with a way of defending themselves, that tyranny is impossible. They're going to find out that there's a lot more heart in them than they thought. They're going to find out that they're beautiful people. They're going to find out that there's a real reason for living. Hope. The pursuit of happiness. The ability to express yourself. And so many more things that we take for granted and believe that our government is working for.
That was Matthew Tartaglia. He was a FEMA search and rescue debriefer who spent 10 weeks at Ground Zero and basically whose life is shredding because of it. There are 40,000 people who showed up that day, 20,000 of whom have already been diagnosed with something called RADS, reactive airway dystrophy syndrome. They are unable to breathe, they are unable to work, and they are getting the shaft from the state, from the federal government. And the most recent ruling in New York was that if a rescue worker could prove that this happened to him on day one, 9/11, not 9/12 or 9/13, then they might get some help. But there was John Field is famous for setting up the Feel Good Foundation. He was on the site when a crane carrying a big steel beam swung by and clipped his foot. He's had 8 surgeries, and they have told him that, when did this happen? And he said, he gave the date, it was about 3 days after 9/11. They said, oh, well, 72 hours after the terror attack doesn't qualify as the terror attack. So, sorry, we can't help you.
Well, this is our first attempt to structure the information showing that there seems to be more behind 9/11 than just a classical controlled demolition. Still, one point, this is a shot taken from a helicopter that day. You can clearly see that the dust clouds are hot. At first, a small knob forms over the North Tower, and a symmetrical ring of dust clouds can be seen. And then this ring of dust clouds rises steadily, with the knob standing inside the ring, and it rises within 1 minute to a height of approximately 500 to 800 meters, so that the former knob is no longer visible. Well, this is our first comparison. And then there were, let us say, some curiosities, which I would like to show you shortly for the south and respectively also for the North Tower. So just a few clicks to begin with. We have the South Tower's top, toppling over and starting to rotate in free fall. Suddenly it stabilizes as if hitting a stopping bolt, continues free fall and dissolves. The disappearance of angular momentum during free fall while being dissolved at the same time is something which cannot happen. Then you have the white fumes escaping at the building's base, a sort of fine mist which is rising from below while the building itself is boiling over, mushrooming on top. At the South Tower's facade you have the very well documented steam explosions, which you all know. You have the eruptive destruction pattern, thus the ejection of material, while at the same time you find still standing structures of the building's core. You have the formation of different sections inside the dust cloud, meaning you have a very interesting cloud in different shapes and forms. You see a pitch black cloud of iron or steel dust. Smoothly distributed metallic dust simply appears as black, and you see a white cloud respectively, showing the characteristics of a fountain. In addition to the fountain, you have a firmly standing cloud stem. When using the word fountain, I mean, you see, many people say in this case the building would have burst at its base. When you observe a water spout fountain in nature, you see that nothing bursts at its base. When the water jet exits the nozzle, the energy of the material, of the water in this case, is sufficiently high to counter gravity by its directional kinetic energy and momentum. And this is exactly what we observe in case of the South Tower. We had eruptions of steam and gases from underground, meaning that even before the main cloud was rolling over and through the streets, you had these eruptions from underground nearly at the same time. This is an example. The cloud will grow significantly in size. You see it rising before the main dust cloud. This is the same shot, taken from another position. And yet again, that's the same steam eruption from below, which will grow very, very rapidly, mixing with the black iron cloud showing here. So white is mixing with black. This means you have highly energetic phenomena underground. And finally, you have the formation of still standing structures, which will remain from the building noticeable near the base. Normally, you have a complete destruction at the base, and in this case, structures are still standing partly in big pieces. The same applies also for the North Tower. Just clicking through the information, we have residual findings of thermite. You see the mushrooming on top and the escaping fumes at the building's base while the building is cooking over on top, so to speak. We have the steam explosions at the building's facade. These you know very well, as they are shown quite often. You have the eruptive destruction pattern, meaning the ejection of material. Clearly visible here is the formation of a parabola. And you have the formation of different sections inside the dust cloud, also in the case of North Tower. The black iron cloud centered in the middle. You have the fountain and the standing cloud stem. Here in comparison to a nuclear experiment, usually right over the cauldron, hot many thousand degrees, a standing cloud is developing. The stem formation is clearly visible in case of the North Tower and stable for quite some time. You have pressure equalization and powerful currents of upwinds. In the beginning I found this difficult to understand. There were in fact survivors inside the North Tower and even a person who survived a free fall from this position downwards, just because the whole object was acting like a wind tunnel. So he dropped several floors inside this wind tunnel, which means that the upwinds had at least a speed of 150 kilometers per hour, which is needed to have a person floating on the resulting air cushion. And the firefighter in the protected pocket at the base said he had to crouch down into a corner in order to prevent being lifted upwards, stating that his helmet started to fly off his head.
Do you have any sense for how you fell from the 22nd floor, which is the way you've identified it? You landed on a rubble that most people think was about 7 stories high. Correct. So we're talking about a 15-story free fall on theoretically a piece of concrete. That's why they call you the 9/11 surfer. There are people in this documentary, as the viewers will see tonight, MIT physicists who explain perhaps what might have happened, a hurricane-force wind that almost lifted you up and allowed you to float down. Do you remember at all what it felt like? Do you have any idea of how you might have survived that fall?
I remember everything. I remember the fall. Every moment of that fall I remember. So I experienced it, and I think it's how I've been describing it that I guess the experts were able to come up with that theory. I always wondered myself, so I guess it makes sense.
I heard this very, very loud noise above me. It was just a tremendous roar, and then the wind, a very, very fierce wind, and my it started lifting me up off the ground, and so that's when I crouched down. The next thing I just crouched down. I got to the corner of the staircase by the railing, and I just got as small as I could possibly get.
And at last you have the famous spire, which is the still standing structure, which you see here. The spire is the still standing structure, visible for both towers, which was especially pronounced for the North Tower. Here you can see the collapsing North Tower. In a few seconds you will see the formation of the spire.
Oh my God.
Well, here it is. These are the remains of the tower. It will stand for 10 seconds. It also will crumble down. In addition, you can also see the central cloud and ring of dust, which started to rise shortly after. Well, at this point I already thought this is rather interesting, because something about it seemed a bit odd. And entirely supposing that all this is just a simple classical controlled demolition, well, it didn't look that way. And nonetheless, I did not believe in a nuclear component. I just decided to let things rest for a few weeks and started to browse for some material containing political information on the internet. And between other stories, I found a statement of former CIA agent Mrs. Susan Lindauer. And I was listening to her after work. You know how things are, still sitting at a computer in the evening, listening to some alternative media information. And what she was talking about seemed to be in accordance with the average knowledge, with the accepted news and information. She was talking about Iraq, about the sanctions, about the children dying because of the sanctions. But suddenly she was saying something which did not fit the accepted frame of information to such an extent that I decided she must have gone mad, and I switched the channel. But after a while, I returned to this information channel to re-listen. Actually, she said she had received a personal warning from her superior, Richard Fues, to absolutely avoid a trip to New York at all costs, as they were expecting the use of a thermonuclear device in the city. He warned her of radiation contamination.
And Richard Fues said to me, my God, what if there is no FBI director when this happens? I said, do you think it's that soon? Do you think the attack is imminent? He said, oh yeah. He said, it's absolutely just in the next couple of weeks. He said, I don't want, and I said, well, God, Richard, I'll go back to New York right now, and I'll pump the Iraqis and see if they've got anything from Baghdad. I'll see if they have any news for us. And he said, oh my God, Susan, do not go back to New York City. It's too dangerous. We are expecting the use of a miniature thermonuclear device. And they were not afraid that I was going to be hurt by like falling debris in the World Trade Center. I wasn't going to be at the World Trade Center. They were afraid of radiation contamination, like the winds blowing the radioactive stuff. And that's what he was like, don't go up there, we're expecting mass casualties.
After a while, however, I stumbled over another story on YouTube as well. Unfortunately, I cannot name the source for this clip anymore. Finally, it will depend on historians like Daniele Ganser to prove this story correct or false. A politician came out with the information that I had a visit from an American general in Brussels, who told them in respect to the formation of the Coalition of the Willing, you must join us. The situation is much worse than you think. Osama bin Laden is in possession of about 15 small nuclear weapons. He's ready to use them, and if you don't join us, there's a real danger that nuclear mushroom clouds will rise over European cities. The politician in his interview continued. After these words, the American general showed us a video where we watched in horror and disbelief how a gigantic mushroom cloud rose over New York. We asked after the presentation if he could make this video available to the public, and the general denied our question. This was classical information. For me, this was also a strange sort of news. I was thinking to myself, what is talking about? For I had never heard anything about a giant mushroom cloud in relation to 9/11 rising over some part of the city of New York. And then I started my research, searching this mushroom cloud only. I dropped everything else and concentrated on searching for this mushroom cloud. I was thinking to myself, it can't be number 1, it can't be number 2, consequently it belongs to Building 7. But Building 7 collapses into a heap of rubble. Period. Then a few weeks passed by, and suddenly I found it. Really, I was so amazed I watched the clip over and over again. The rising mushroom cloud over Building 7. Actually, the news anchor who was commenting the event compared it to a volcano eruption.
And watching all day, this is like watching the collapse of an active volcano. And the dust from it is not unlike that from a volcano. We are on the phone with New York Fire Department Lieutenant David Restuccio. Lieutenant, where are you right now?
I'm at the corner of Northmore Street and Greenwich Street.
Can you confirm it was number 7 that just went in?
Yes, sir.
And you guys knew this was coming all day?
We had heard reports that the building was unstable and that it eventually would either come down on its own or it would be taken down. I would imagine it came down on its own.
Well, the total height is approximately 1.5 kilometers. This small tower here is 300 meters high. On this basis, you can estimate the overall height of the mushroom cloud over New York. This was Building 7. No, you have to search quite a long time. I found only 5 shots of this mushroom cloud. Most of them are taken directly from below. I made them available on our website. They are referenced and available. The cloud shows some unique characteristics if you look carefully. It has a funnel, a so-called vortex. It shows several sections or steps in height, and after the funnel it has in addition an extra bulb on top. This means that you have strong friction and induced rotation phenomena between the cool and hard masses of air. In addition, if the first layer of cold air is reached and the energetic center from below pushes with a hot sting of hot air through this cold layer, then you will observe that out of the already cold masses of the cloud a new funnel emerges. This is the one which is shown here. So, first you have these cauliflowering mushroom clouds, then you have the funnel. Here you can see a different picture of the same situation, this time taken from below. On the right you can see a reference picture of a nuclear test Nancy, and you have the mushroom cloud climbing to a height of 1,300 meters or 1,500 meters. This small tower did vanish in the base surge, 300 meters in height. Here you see 200 meters. All this is a rough estimation based on the height of the surrounding buildings. Here you can see the nuclear weapon test Nancy. You see the stem formation of the main cloud standing firmly above the cauldron with the boiling rocks underneath, as well as the characteristic second bulb.
Schwerkraft und Kernkrieg kann da schon mal nicht die Ursache sein.
Nein.
Gut.
No. And inevitably there's a growing suspicion. You did not really by chance carry out a nuclear field experiment on the civilian population? A suspicion which seems not too far-fetched, especially when analyzing the current political situation. If you are planning a Third World War, then you have to know how to deal with radioactivity in a densely populated area and what kind of medicine you have to provide to the suffering civilian population. These people are planning things on a different scale. Their goal is global control. They do not care about a few 100,000 people who die of radiation sickness. Concerning the persistent hot chambers underground, the shots taken by a satellite are showing one very interesting feature. The building's center is thermally not very active, which seems strange at first. Also, on this picture you see that the center of the building spaces, 7, 1 and 2, does not store the entire thermal energy. However, this makes sense when you suppose that we witness here the formation of a cavity or several caverns. You have to understand that if you detonate a nuclear device underground without giving the possibility to depressurize, what will happen to the explosion's energy in the rock bed? The rock bed can't be compressed. It cannot disappear. The only thing that can happen is the formation of a liquid rock bladder under high pressure, which stores the energy of the explosion. So, as a result, you have this magma chamber, this bomb created, so to speak. I mean, a secondary bomb which contains the secondary energy, not the full energy of the first explosion, but a part of it. The ground itself stores this secondary energy, and this magma chamber wants to burst open. And if it does empty itself, you will have the fountain effects in the cavity created. And an empty cavity is not good for storing heat, simply because it is filled with nothing more but air. Well, and I really got sick after seeing these photos. These are vitrified, formerly liquefied rock structures inside the cavity. These are situated in New York, and you see these glass-like structures of formerly molten rock in the melting pot. The rocks were boiling. The workers, shown on these pictures, most likely got significant doses of radioactive radiation. This means that they contracted cancer with high probability later. With this, we have already collected a considerable amount of pieces of evidence. And while reviewing this evidence, I felt somewhat sick. On the other hand, I also got angry. Because you have to understand what the perpetrators finally did to the firefighters. First, they created an event using these airplanes, and the first responders rushed into the towers. When the firefighters were inside the towers, a nuclear weapon was detonated directly underneath the building. After the collapse of the towers, they ordered the first responders into the area without adequate protection and without a warning that the area was contaminated, so that a medical study could be carried out. Then, Congress at first blocked a bill which would pay for all of the healthcare costs of these first responders. Finally, they passed a bill which would pay for some of the healthcare costs, but specifically excluding cancer from the bill. And only in the year 2011, and because of public pressure, President Obama signed the so-called Zadrogo Act, which finally covers some of the healthcare costs of the first responders who suffer from cancer. So, the despise for human life in all this planning can hardly be topped. It would not be exaggerated to call this satanic.
So, the cancer don't kill me, the pneumonia is gonna kill me. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here to let everybody know that there are hundreds, maybe thousands of people just like me that went down there as a patriot to our country and not caring about our own health or our own goodwill, thinking that the government would take care of us. And people just like me sitting, look at all these pills I take now. My life is all about medicine. I go to the doctors 2 or 3 times a month. I see 4 different doctors a month now, where I never saw anyone. I never even had a physician before 9/11. Never. I never was in this for myself. I hope to God that it is. And I'm not selfish in this. I'm only 50 years old. There's not a chance in hell that I'm ever going to work again with sick as I am. So the compensation is not just for me. The compensation is for my family. I brought this stuff back to my house. What about my kids? What about the other responders' kids? If I had all that toxicity on me and I wound up with cancer 8-10 years later, did I get my kids sick?